Questions? Anyone have questions? Can Armon's earthly incarnation be averted? Ooh, we were talking about this for a bit yesterday. Or is it presumably necessary for collective conscious evolution? Do you think it will be a literal person or something more vague and abstract? This is where I'm interjecting, like an AI or something. But, oh, man, yeah, we talked about this a bunch yesterday.
We did, yeah.
So the way that Steiner talked about the incarnation of Armon and its necessity was insofar as he thought about humans evolving in this etheric direction, kind of becoming more spiritual, as it were, and it's hard to tell whether he meant less corporeal at the same time, which it seems he might have just kind of humans going off into the spiritual and kind of forsaking the corporeal to some extent. It could also maybe be that he meant that there is some sort of stacking where our locus of consciousness is more identified with our etheric body, which is, more interconnected and metatemporal. But it's this idea that he thought that humans, the physical body, would essentially take a back seat in one way or another, and that we would treat it more like a vehicle of sorts that we would get in and out of, like, metaphysically, or however you want to think about it, such that he would talk about the incarnation of Armon as essentially our bodies becoming technological and man and machine merging, like we see with Elon and the brain plugs and stuff like that. How Matrix, so yeah, in that regard, it's kind of, he talked about how Armon would have to basically have control of our physical bodies, and he talked about how Armon donated the physicality. I mean, there's a lot that could be said about it. I think it's a topic of our time, finding a right relationship with Armon.
I get what he's doing. He's saying, okay, there was the incarnation of Lucifer, and then 3,000 years, and then the incarnation of Christ, and then 3,000 years, and then you get Armon. I don't really see that. I think that Lucifer and Armon are both incarnating now simultaneously.
Yeah, it does seem that they arise with each other, insofar as the way that it can be conceived, if you have Christ as the balanced middle, there is a fall which can occur into the world of duality, where things become split between Lucifer and Armon, and we don't see a transcendent unity. We have the mind, Lucifer, the body, Armon problem, physicality, and mentality, or whatever. So it seems that whenever you have Armon, you also have Lucifer, or whenever, Yaldabaoth, or however you want to think about it. Like, on one sense, we can see the electrification of the earth as this Armonic mechanizing, but at the same time, it's got the light bringer, Lucifer, like shining, and yeah, it's it definitely seems like you get these flips, these inversions, and biblically you could see this in the story of the beast killing the whore, where the whore is Luciferic, licentious freedom, kind of at one-ment, as it were, but then that flips into totalitarian control, this crackdown, where the system of the beast kind of kills the licentious whore time period, as it were. Anytime things get too free, there is this balancing function which happens, and we get these wobbles and such. So yeah, it's some vague, amorphous thoughts for you.
So there is this pattern with the elite that involves keeping people locked in a 15-minute city, keeping people locked in their location so they're not talking to people from different areas, they're not mixing with different people, and everybody kind of gets stuck in their little echo chamber of their community, which can be easier. So it's easier to control people when they're not mixing and talking and collaborating with other people around the world that have different perspectives, that are leading to deeper and more nourishing conversations, expansive conversations. You keep everybody in a very, very small group where that can be controlled, and through different kind of hazards, or like internet hackings or an EMP or something, you can actually eventually even break the internet down into something that isn't even as free now. So the idea here, therefore, is that these people who I would argue are part of a death cult, they're looking to slowly smother individuals into these smart cities, highly technological, high surveillance cities where they really can be more easily controlled, just like how we go from living in these beautiful homes that appear at the turn of the century to living in a pod and having something like this small. So it's really kind of cramping people into a more and more controlled way of life and making people afraid to fly, afraid to travel.
Yeah, so in the video, the accelerating spiral of time, the main imagery there was that it's like you have these two, like a galaxy, right? Like you've got these two spirals that are converging on one another. One is Lucifer, one's Ahriman. So you have the black serpent and the white serpent, and it's kind of like the Kundalini and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, what I see, I mean, we definitely see the incarnation of Ahriman. And we can, it seems to be happening in this very methodical way. The 19th century, we created Ahriman's etheric body, right? All the oil fields and the coal mines and the factories, right? The metabolic body, the physiological infrastructure of Ahriman. In the 20th century, we created the sentient body, the electrical nervous system of Ahriman. And now we're creating its mental body with the internet, with AI, and so forth. Now, what seems to be going on here with the Luciferic, though, the incarnation of the Luciferic would be essentially the Matrix, right? It would be this virtual hyperspace of hedonism and escapism, rejection of reality by sinking into this kind of solipsistic fantasy world. If that was incarnated in 3000 BC in China, I have no fucking clue what that would look like, but we're definitely seeing it now, right? I called it the virtual womb in that video.
It kind of fits with this matrix of sorts, right? The digital womb is at the same time this Luciferic escape, this, just like we were talking about with Plato's cave, escaping to the spiritual somewhere else or something, but it's very Gnostic in that way, in that regard, in a bad way. But it's also this Ahrimanic control in framing. It's like we get this split, this deepening split or something, and maybe there's even kind of a negative synthesis, of sorts. But like the it's the internet is also this kind of prison of sorts, that keeps you from contact with the real. And I don't mean to get too doomer out here, but yeah, we're reaching ahead, people. We have the times we live. Listen here, people. We have to find the right relationship with these demons, is a perhaps way to put it. But because they are ambivalent, we need both of these tendencies, but we have to find a balance and such like that. So the redemption of Lucifer, the redemption of Ahriman. And this connects to the whole idea of Leviathan being, I don't know, that if the fallen world or the fall into dualism is kind of it's this forgetting of, and it goes with sleep as well, where in Jewish thought also there's kind of this idea of Leviathan or the adversary as basically pets of God in a sense, or like, I guess what I'm speaking to here is this idea of all things having a purpose, where even the adversary, this kind of this antithesis in a sense, was created by God for a reason of sorts, where it's like, do you see what I'm getting at here a little bit, where the tricksterness is like, there is a function that is played by this this separating, I don't know, maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew here, but...
Well, that makes me think of the Apocrypha and the book of Judas in particular, like where Jesus is depicted as this almost kind of Diogenes-esque figure. He's constantly laughing. He feels like... It kind of feels like the apostles, or the 12 disciples, they are... they're looking for this deep, somber, stoic, spiritual truth, and Jesus is depicted as just kind of laughing at them, because the actual truth, which within that story, it's Judas who's the one who really gets the joke, the cosmic joke.
What would you say is the self's relationship to the unconscious, and how does free will or agency, or whatever you want to call it, factor into that? Oh my gosh, man, these questions.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we were just saying, in a sense, or what I was trying to articulate, where the self can be kind of conceived of as God of sorts, and the unconscious is kind of this multiplicity, the world of potential, which we can which is perhaps in this kind of opponent processing, maybe even a marital relationship, between heaven and earth, and that the so-called fallen world actually has a function, such that we cannot demonize the unconscious and try to eradicate it, right? We have to have a productive relationship with a generative relationship with the potential space. These are some thoughts coming to mind.
So the way that Carl Jung conceptualized the capital S self, the higher self, he conceptualized it in this very type 1 sort of way, as this kind of ideal, as a kind of center of gravity, as it were, much like the sun, right, around which things orbit. And he's not wrong about that. That's definitely an aspect of it. But the way that I've been trying to think of this is that subjectivity, okay? And by subjectivity, I don't mean awareness or consciousness in this much more general sense, but subjectivity specifically in the sense of there being a sense of boundedness which separates an internal world from an external one. This is, as Fichte shows us, that's the I am, right? That's the self-conceptual loop of that feeling of I-ness. It splits awareness. It crucifies being, in a sense. Heidegger has a very similar way of putting it when he talks about this in his contributions to the philosophy of the event, one of his later writings. But in any case, you have this split then between the formlessness of pure awareness itself, and then the concept of the I, which is simply the concept of unity itself, right? And then you have the bodily realm, and then you have spirit, thought, right? And you get this kind of fourfold split that happens, which again, there's this meeting of the quadratic and the triadic within there that you see in the 12-fold structure of the zodiac and the astrochromogram. You also see that meeting of the triadic and the quadratic within the structure of the tetrahedron, etc. It's all there anyway, and so there is this sense in which that pure form of unity is the archetypal self, the archetypal I, as it were, but it's not the whole thing. There's also that formless abyss of subjectivity as well, which is also implicated within that. And so there's this multifacetedness to the self, right? That contains it contains structure of the entire universe, I would say. But in any case, with regards to freedom and agency, this is where I think that this kind of philosophy has to be able to move beyond Aristotelian conception of formlessness and indeterminacy, and by extension corporeality, as this kind of fallenness or impurity or contamination, and rather see redemption not as a dematerialization and a kind of slipping off into some idyllic world, the escape from the other, the mother, right? But rather as this harmonization, which includes chaos, which includes dissonance, which includes all of the baggage and trauma and scars of the bodily world, that there's this redemption of that, this sublimation of pain into tragic beauty that ultimately gives us the intensity of numinosity, which is what reality is moving towards.
That's what it's all about. Yeah,
that's the whole game, baby. Yeah, and what else was I going to say? I had something else. With freedom, yeah, that was the next thing, is that freedom really then becomes about the degree to which these different things in orbit around that nucleus, that center of gravity, are brought into harmony with one another, you know, and the way that the Platonists and Neoplatonists thought of this is useful here. I mean, the way they saw it is like, you know, if you're being dragged around by the impulses and instincts of the body, you know, that's being a slave to your passions. That's the way they would have seen it. But bringing those things into accordance with this kind of higher unity implicated by the I, the form of formlessness, the form of formedness, the monad, that's where the real freedom is, because then everything is brought into alignment with this inner will, which is ultimately simply the affirmation of the experience of being, of becoming, right? And really, that's, once you peel back the layers, I think that's exactly what we find underneath Nietzsche's notion of the will to power as well, right? You know, once you peel it back enough, this will to life affirmation has this very Christic type of thing going on to it, which is a bit ironic considering how vehemently anti-Christian Nietzsche could be at times. You know, I would still say that when all said and done, he is probably the most agonizingly Christian philosopher of them all. So, yeah, there you go. There's my take on that, I suppose.
Yeah, cool.
Something about how the self is also in the unconscious to some extent, right? Like, well, you can flip it where it'd be like the ego is the potential is like the feminine in relation to the masculine self abiding in the unconscious, like the spiritual world being the unconscious. But generally speaking, yeah, I think that the idea of God hovering above the waters, like this is the, you know, it's just the kind of verticality of it can be weird, but yeah, what Keelan just said, I agree with all that.
The way that Whitehead initially frames this is a duality of potentiality and actuality, which is really a kind of inversion of the Aristotelian distinction between potentiality and actuality. Aristotle saw the forms, right, the eternal objects, as pure actuality, and the cora, the prima materia, as pure potentiality. Whitehead's essentially flipping that upside down, and it gets complicated. It gets complicated because then it doesn't really work, in my opinion. Ultimately, I think you have to conceptualize, well, the conceptual, the world of forms or thought forms or whatever you want to call it, that as both actuality and potentiality, and the corporeal, the physical, as actuality and potentiality. And so it's complicated. Let's put it that way. But that's the gist of it. Ask Matthew Segal. He's better at this than I am. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe I'll do some wrapping thoughts. Like maybe try and tie it together with a nice little big picture bow, as it were, where this creative agency, which occurs at the boundary, because true creativity and musicality, you know, Genesis, creative generativity, right? Like in Genesis, and like we just talked about generative marriages and such like that. This creativity is kind of abiding in that, in between that metaxu, the tension, as it were, like the conjunction of opposites between the heavenly, the unity, and the multiplicity of the many. And yeah, finding this relationship with the corporeal is, I think, a big thing in our time, such that the divine feminine, all this stuff that we've been talking about and how it fits well with Christianity and all that, even going back to the age of Aquarius, where Aquarius goes with the Grail and the divine feminine, at least through the star card, and also the internalization of thinking and such are in this way. Basically, just bringing it back towards this idea that we have to stand at the balance, you know, between the so-called fallen, so-called evil corporeal suffering and such, and you know, the heavenly ruminations of sorts. Basically what I'm trying to say is, don't forget to go outside and touch grass, folks. You know, meet up with your friends in person, go on a road trip perhaps. That's kind of and if you want inspiration in this regard, check out estuaryroadtrip.com.
Grab life by the horns. Do the thing. Eat the donuts. Flirt with the cashier at Walgreens. You got this. Live your life, buddies. Okay, we're done with this. Take it easy, guys. Thank you for hanging out. Blah blah blah. Bye.